They'll tell you it's progress, that we've evolved past outdated roles, that we're free now, free to define ourselves beyond gender, beyond biology, beyond tradition. But what if that's only half the truth? What if beneath the shiny slogans and rainbow flags, we're running from something much older and far more sacred? Carl Jung saw it clearly. Our culture doesn't just neglect the feminine, it fears her. Not women, but the archetypal goddess, the Anima, the deep, mysterious, creative force that lives in both men and women and terrifies a world obsessed with control. We've traded spiritual balance for ideological warfare. MGTOW blames feminism. Feminism blames patriarchy. Trans ideologies try to dissolve the binary altogether. But no one's asking the deeper question. What happens to a culture that cuts itself off from the soul, from the unconscious, from the archetypes that once guided kings, mystics, and lovers alike? Jung warned us, if we deny the inner feminine, she returns as chaos. And that's exactly what we're living. Confusion, division, alienation. Not because we've come too far, but because we've forgotten where we came from. This video doesn't play it safe. It digs deep into why gender relations are fractured, why modern ideologies feel empty, and why the goddess, that sacred presence of femininity in the psyche, is still being exiled in our so-called enlightened age. You'll discover how the Anima and Animus shape your desires, your triggers, and your projections. You'll see why individuation demands more than choosing sides. And most of all, you'll learn how to reconnect with the parts of yourself this world wants you to forget. Ready to see through the illusion? Chapter 1. The Anima and Animus Archetypes. It's astonishing how many inner battles could be resolved if more people understood the Anima and Animus. Carl Jung wasn't just toying with fancy ideas when he said that within every man exists a feminine aspect, the Anima, and within every woman, a masculine aspect, the Animus. These aren't just poetic metaphors. They're psychological truths that shape how we relate to ourselves and everyone around us. They live deep within the psyche, nestled right between our ego and the vast collective unconscious, often dictating emotional responses, desires, and irrational opinions we think are purely logical. Now, here's the twist. These archetypes don't just sit quietly in the background. They whisper, they nudge, they seduce. The Anima can make a man fall for a woman who embodies his ideal of femininity, not because of who she is, but because of what she represents to his unconscious mind. The Animus, just as tricky, it can fill a woman with righteous certainty, even when she's standing on shaky ground, convinced she knows best. It's not personal, it's psychological. And unless these inner forces are brought to light, we end up caught in patterns that feel like fate, but are actually projections. That's why self-awareness is key. Think of the Anima and Animus as inner guides, not enemies. They're bridges between the conscious and unconscious mind, much like mythological messengers or spirit guides. When embraced consciously, the Anima softens a man's rigidity, opening him to emotion, nature, and connection. The Animus empowers a woman to assert, challenge, and create. But left unchecked, these same forces wreak havoc in our gender dynamics, clouding communication and reinforcing unhealthy patterns shaped by both biology and cultural evolution. Let's get practical. A man could explore his Anima through creative practices, writing poetry, dancing, or immersing himself in emotional films like the eternal sunshine of the spotless mind. A woman might integrate her Animus by reading Jung's Ion, learning philosophy, or engaging in public speaking. These aren't superficial activities. They're portals. They help bring these archetypes out of the shadows and into the light of the self. It's individuation in action, one brave step at a time. And here's the thing. Our cultural conflicts aren't just out there in society. They're also in here, inside each of us. The divide between femininity and masculinity isn't just political, it's psychic. And until we make peace with the anima and animus within, we'll keep seeing their war play out in our relationships, ideologies, and even in the rise of technological advances that try to bypass nature itself. Chapter 2: Projections and their psychological effects. There's a strange thing the mind does when it meets what it can't yet accept. It projects. Carl Jung made this painfully clear. We don't just love or hate others randomly. What we're really doing is seeing parts of our own psyche, especially the anima and animus, reflected in them. The problem? These projections feel real. They feel justified. So we chase ghosts, idolize lovers, or demonize partners without ever realizing we're fighting with fragments of ourselves. It's the ego's favorite trick, cloaked in self-righteousness. Let's take relationships, for example. A man falls madly in love with a woman not for who she is, but because she matches his inner anima. Maybe she's ethereal, mysterious, emotional. But when she eventually shows her true human self, he feels betrayed. Why? Because she failed to live up to the projection. Women fall into the same trap with the animus, admiring confidence that turns into stubborn arrogance. Suddenly, admiration becomes resentment. This is how projections distort real intimacy. They turn people into mirrors rather than individuals. And the catch is, these projections don't go away just because we read about them. They're sticky. They feel right. That's why Jung emphasized moral effort. Real, conscious inner work. Without it, the psyche stays fragmented, bouncing between idealization and disappointment. Self-awareness becomes a daily practice. Journaling with brutal honesty, reflecting on emotional triggers, and asking, is this about them or me? That's the battlefield where spiritual growth begins. Not in the bookshelves, but in everyday moments of irritation and adoration. Now here's where things get wild. These projections don't just mess with love lives. They shape ideologies, politics, and even movements like feminism or MGTOW. We project our wounds into the world, then pick sides in battles that are, at their core, psychic conflicts. Masculinity versus femininity? That's not just sociology, it's inner warfare made visible. When we project the animus onto authority figures or the anima onto celebrities, we're chasing unconscious patterns dressed up as moral clarity. So, how do we stop this cycle? We don't, not entirely, but we can become aware of it. We can peel the illusion back, piece by piece. And when we do, we realize our enemy was never out there. It was the shadow within. But there's a figure in this inner world that knows the way through the darkness. A guide, a whisperer, a bridge between the seen and the unseen. And that brings us to the curious and mysterious role of the psychopomp. Chapter 3: The psychopomp role of the animus. The animus isn't just a symbol of masculinity within the feminine psyche. It's a psychopomp. That word might sound mystical, and well, it is. A psychopomp is a soul guide, a figure who leads us from the known into the unknown, from the rational into the intuitive, from consciousness into the depths of the unconscious. In mythology, you'll find this figure as Hermes, Anubis, or even Gandalf. In Jungian psychology, the animus plays that role in a woman's inner world, whispering truths, initiating insights, and sometimes dragging her kicking and screaming into deeper self-awareness. This isn't some fairy tale concept. Picture a woman caught in repetitive thought loops, rigid beliefs, intellectual pride, or moral certainty. That's often the shadow of the animus speaking through her, not as a guide but as a tyrant. The goal isn't to silence him, but to recognize when he's operating in distortion. The healthy animus doesn't dominate. He inspires. He points to meaning beyond the ego, helping her cross into spiritual growth, individuation, and connection with the collective unconscious in a way the outer world simply can't replicate. Practically speaking, one way a woman might connect with her animus is through myth, philosophy, or meaningful solitude. Reading the Red Book by Carl Jung, for instance, or engaging in depth journaling where logic meets emotion. In these practices, she starts hearing the true voice of the animus, not the one parroting societal dogma, but the one leading her toward inner transformation. It's the difference between blindly arguing a point and quietly uncovering a truth that changes her life. That's the animus as a psychopomp. And for men, understanding this helps them stop being mistaken for the animus in women's lives. It's common for men to unconsciously embody projected animus energy in relationships, becoming either savior or villain in someone else's psychodrama. When both parties become aware of this dance, the real healing begins. No one is being used anymore. They're both learning, growing, becoming whole. That's where gender dynamics stop being war zones and start becoming sacred ground for consciousness expansion. This is where the idea of archetypes jumps off the page and starts influencing real life. The animus, as a guide, reveals how deep the psyche goes and how myth and spirit still shape our emotional lives. But these archetypes don't exist in a vacuum. They're shaped, constrained, and provoked by cultural forces. And when we look around, we start to see how deeply femininity and masculinity are being rewritten by the very society we live in. Chapter 4: Feminine and Masculine Archetypes in Cultural Context. You don't need a PhD in psychology to feel it. Masculinity and femininity are at war in our culture. But here's the kicker. The battle isn't new. It's ancient. Carl Jung understood that the anima and animus aren't just personal. They're cultural forces. Archetypes embedded in the collective unconscious that shift and morph depending on the era. And right now, we're living through a massive reconfiguration of those energies. Feminism, patriarchy, transgender ideologies. These aren't just political hot potatoes. They're psychic earthquakes shaking the very structure of our gender dynamics. Let's be honest, the patriarchy didn't just make women suffer. It also disfigured the masculine. Men were taught to suppress vulnerability, reject the anima, and idolize dominance. In parallel, women were told to embody nurturing while stifling the animus, unless, of course, they could weaponize it to win in a male-dominated system. Enter feminism, a cultural revolt that isn't just social, but deeply psychological. It's the anima waking up and saying, I won't stay in the dark anymore. But when power shifts too fast, the pendulum can swing into shadow. That's why we're seeing so much polarity now. MGTOW, radical feminism, gender fluidity. These aren't random. They're expressions of a collective psyche trying to integrate the feminine and masculine in a world that no longer trusts either. Technology has only accelerated the confusion. With transhumanism, social media, and algorithmic personas, the ancient tension between biology and spirit has become more tangled than ever. But the psyche doesn't forget. The archetypes still operate, even under layers of postmodern noise. What does this mean for you? Well, you're already in the middle of it. Every time you navigate a relationship, express your identity, or question your role in society, you're negotiating with these forces. Are you honoring the feminine within? Are you listening to the animus without letting him control you? Are you projecting ideals based on cultural scripts? Or are you truly integrating your psyche? These aren't just self-help questions. They're spiritual survival skills in a culture spinning on the axis of unconscious archetypes. So if culture is the canvas, archetypes are the brushstrokes. And while society keeps rewriting the rules, the inner work remains timeless. Integration doesn't depend on Twitter trends or ideological purity. It depends on moral effort, on confronting your own shadow and peeling back the projections. Because let's face it, until we deal with the real blockages inside, we'll keep acting out the same dramas with new costumes. And the biggest obstacle of all, it isn't the world, it's the moral resistance within. Chapter 5: Moral Obstacles and Self-Integration. Let's talk about the real enemies of growth. Not society, not your ex, not even your parents. The true obstacles live within: vanity, resentment, pride, and self-righteousness. Carl Jung didn't sugarcoat this. If the goal is individuation, becoming a whole, integrated self, then these moral blockages are the dragons at the gate. They don't just delay your evolution, they actively sabotage it. You can read all the psychology books in the world, meditate in the Himalayas, quote the Kybalion backward, and still be stuck if you refuse to examine your ego's favorite defenses. You've seen it before, haven't you? That friend who always plays the victim, convinced the universe is out to get them. Or the colleague who masks their insecurity with intellectual superiority. These aren't personality quirks. They're defense mechanisms rooted in unconscious shadow. They protect the ego from discomfort, but block consciousness from expanding. Jung called this the moral effort. The grit it takes to look at yourself honestly, admit your projections, and own your contradictions without collapsing in shame. It's not easy, but it's necessary. Self-awareness requires emotional bravery. It means pausing when your partner triggers you and asking, what part of me feels threatened right now? It means journaling without trying to sound wise. It means catching yourself mid-rant and realizing, ouch, that you're the one clinging to irrational opinions. This is where spiritual growth meets psychological realism. And this is also where true freedom begins. Not the freedom to do whatever you want, but the freedom from being ruled by what you don't understand. One way to tackle these moral hurdles is through structured shadow work. Pick up Owning Your Own Shadow by Robert A. Johnson, or revisit Ion by Carl Jung. Not just to understand archetypes, but to trace how your personal myth is unfolding through your choices. Use daily reflections, not surface-level affirmations, but soul-level questions like, where am I being dishonest with myself today? Or what am I unwilling to forgive? This isn't about guilt. It's about reclaiming wholeness. The psyche craves unity, not perfection. And just when you think you're making progress, the world throws you a curveball, something that challenges your beliefs, rattles your identity, and tempts you to project again. That's not regression, it's initiation. But here's the catch. In a world increasingly obsessed with artificial intelligence and synthetic progress, we're forgetting something ancient, something primal. And that something is nature itself. Chapter 6: Nature and the Role of Biology. Here's an uncomfortable truth. For all our intellectual advances, we're still biological creatures. And no matter how many layers of ideology, plastic surgery, or artificial hormones we pile on top of that, nature doesn't just disappear. Carl Jung knew this. He saw that beneath the ego and even the collective unconscious lies something older than psychology. Instinct. We are animals with smartphones, and our psyche is shaped as much by hormones and reproduction as by dreams and archetypes. Ignore that, and you're not transcending nature. You're just repressing it in a new costume. Let's take gender roles. Modern society's obsession with blurring or erasing them might seem like progress on the surface, but what if it's actually a disconnection from a body? Masculinity and femininity aren't oppressive by default. They're rooted in biology, but expressed through the psyche. The Animus and Anima exist for a reason. The chaos begins when we try to override them with rigid ideologies or technological solutions. Transhumanism promises to upgrade the human experience, but at what cost? A soul without skin? A psyche without shadow? And this isn't some anti-progress rant. Technology is incredible, but when it's used to deny nature, to edit out the discomfort of embodiment, we lose something essential: our connection to instinct, intuition, and the rhythms of life. Jung believed the body holds wisdom the mind can't grasp. That's why so many of his patients healed not through theory, but through dreams of animals, forests, rivers, symbols of nature trying to reassert itself. Integration means listening to these primal voices, not silencing them with algorithms and apps. Practically speaking, you can start reconnecting with nature by paying attention to how your body reacts to truth. Do you tense up around certain people? Do you feel drained by digital overload? Spend time in silence, in trees, near water, places where the psyche breathes. Read Women Who Run with the Wolves by Clarissa Pinkola Estes or Iron John by Robert Bly. These aren't just stories. They're mirrors of forgotten language, once spoken by the Anima and Animus through the body. Psychology doesn't end in the mind. It starts in the gut. And here's where it gets even deeper. As long as we ignore our biological foundations, our projections will keep intensifying. Gender wars will escalate, relationships will fracture, and cultural confusion will deepen. But beneath it all, the issue isn't technology or ideology. It's how we see each other. Men and women aren't truly meeting anymore. They're clashing with projections that obscure reality. And until we learn to see past these illusions, we'll keep missing the real human standing right in front of us. Chapter 7. The Role of Projections in Gender Relations. Every relationship is a mirror, but most people walk around thinking they're looking at windows. Carl Jung taught us that the Anima and Animus don't just influence who we're attracted to. They actively shape how we relate, what we expect, and how deeply we disappoint each other. It's not that men and women are incompatible. It's that they're often talking to projections, not people. We fall in love with illusions, and when reality kicks in, we blame the other person instead of looking within. This isn't romance. It's psychic confusion dressed in intimacy. Take a man who sees a woman as his savior, his muse, his emotional sanctuary. That's his anima talking, not her personality. She didn't sign up to carry his inner feminine. And when she doesn't live up to that sacred image, he turns cold or critical. Women do the same. They expect men to embody clarity, direction, or moral authority, echoing the voice of the Animus within. But when he falters or reveals vulnerability, they feel betrayed, not because of who he is, but because he cracked the projection. That's where the dance of resentment begins. So how do we untangle this mess? Start by slowing down your assumptions. If you're constantly frustrated with how men are or how women act, you're probably not in touch with the person in front of you. You're reacting to ghosts from your unconscious. Pay attention to emotional surges. That intense attraction or sudden disgust. It might not be about them at all. Try dialoguing with the inner image. Ask yourself, what part of me am I seeing in this person? That's not navel-gazing. That's spiritual hygiene. A powerful practice is dream journaling. Dreams often dramatize our projections before we can see them in waking life. If you keep dreaming of a shadowy lover, a judgmental father, or a mysterious woman in white, you're being shown your own archetypal material. Also, read Inner Work by Robert A. Johnson, which offers practical ways to decode this symbolic language. The goal isn't to eliminate the Anima and Animus. It's to relate to them consciously, so they become guides instead of saboteurs. And when we begin seeing each other clearly, without the fog of projections, something miraculous happens. Relationships stop being battlegrounds and start becoming sacred grounds for evolution. But getting there means doing the hard, inner work. It means confronting not only the illusions we cast on others, but the ones society feeds us daily. And that's where the deeper mystery unfolds. not just between men and women, but between the individual and the forgotten face of the divine itself. Conclusion. What if the war between genders isn't external? The question now isn't whether the anima or animus exist within you. It's whether you're willing to face them. Will you keep chasing illusions in others? Or will you finally turn inward and integrate what's been whispering from your unconscious all along? Jung didn't leave us a map to flatter our egos. He offered a mirror, and that mirror doesn't lie. If you've ever felt lost in love, confused by culture, or betrayed by your own desires, it's not because you're broken. It's because you're being invited to evolve. So, what if the war between genders isn't external? What if it's a psychic conflict that starts inside each of us? Are you willing to confront the shadow of your ideals? Can you sit with the discomfort of seeing yourself in the other? The path to wholeness doesn't begin in ideology. It begins in honesty. And that honesty requires moral effort, courage, and a brutal kind of compassion. Not just for others, but for the projections that have shaped your reality until now. Integration isn't pretty, but it's powerful. Now it's your move. Will you continue to live through projections, or will you start the work of true self-awareness? Have you noticed how your relationships reflect your inner world? Which archetype is playing out in your story right now? The guide, the tyrant, the muse, or the mirror? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I want to hear what you're uncovering. And if this video cracks something open in you, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. We're just getting started, and the next layer runs even deeper